Welcome, everyone, to episode 98 of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, your baby Jesus in velvet pants, if you will. But I am not here alone. No, who is it that dares to call me while I am mid-backflip? Who the fuck is this calling me?
Well, it's everyone's favorite ball-grabbing biatch, Steve Gunley. And this is the podcast. It's all about vampire strippers, tattoo peeling, and mojo bags. That's because this is the podcast about Cryptz, one of the last films, actually the last film from the short-lived Big City Pictures sub-label. Movie studio that's yielded movies like Killjoy, Ragdoll, The Abominable Mr. Bones, a couple of films like that. We're excited to get into this one. This is from 2002, and it's very, very 2002 in the best and worst ways. But I'm excited to dig into it, and we have a very cool guest joining us today. Who is here with us today, Jared?
Yes, well, the very 2002 in the best and worst ways made me think of one prospective guest and only one prospective guest. No, I'm joking. It has nothing to do with that at all. This is someone who is a mainstay of the New York horror scene, someone I'm proud to, run into at events and stuff all the time. She is a media personality and co-host of the Blerdy Massacre podcast. And it's Xero Gravity, the one and only Xero Gravity, who is here to join us. We are honored to have you here. Such a cool New York horror fixture. And here you are on our little show. So thank you.
Here I am. Thank you so much, guys, for having me. And
Absolutely.
Thanks for that bomb intro. Dang. I'm going to have to clip that and save it in my folder.
Yeah, that'll just be your outgoing message from now on your phone. Like, yeah.
There we go. You can't reach me. I'm too busy being iconic, says Jared.
Well, I pride myself on sincerity in these things. Like, if nothing else, when I do these intros, it's like people sometimes send me like a paragraph, and I'm like, oh boy, all right, what can I pull from here? But no, you're just a cool person who I run into at all kinds of cool shit here. So it's very organic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, we're very excited to have you here. We're very excited to be talking about this movie. Another of the classic wasn't on my radar movies. It was sometimes we build the spreadsheet with all of the different movie titles, and sometimes I'm not even like clocking the movies that I'm putting onto the spreadsheet. So this one was really not on my radar, but I had a hell of a lot of fun watching this one. I can't lie. I had a really good time with it. I feel like sort of my overall take on this one is kind of we talk a lot about how like people are trying to sort of make the best that they can with the limits that they have within the Full Moon universe. And I feel like this is a movie that really, really feels like it's not being held back in any way by a lack of talent, by a lack of energy, by a lack of enthusiasm. I really think the only thing kind of hampering this movie in certain ways is just a lack of budget and a lack of time. But you can feel the enthusiasm behind it, and you can feel that like there's some funny bits in here, there's some scary bits in here. They're really kind of making it work with what I'm assuming is just leftover money that they found in the couch cushions. Like, honestly, it's got that kind of production value. Like it's almost like, if David Lynch directed this, it would be Inland Empire, but otherwise it's just kind of that's kind of the vibe it looks like.
No, absolutely. And like this, I think you're totally right, Steve. I had a lot of fun watching this, and you just have to, and we've said that I feel like this has become the mantra of the show. I mean, it's not a very original one, but we've been saying it so much in a lot of these episodes. It's like, you just got to meet these movies where they are.
Yeah.
And you have to look at this movie and judge it, not comparing it to something that had, a 2-year production. It's like, this thing was done probably, this is one of the shortest productions in all of Full Moon.
5 days.
The things we've covered. 5 days.
5 days.
5 days they shot this movie.
I think it was 5 days. Well, I think they had an additional 5 days to write the script, and then they had 5 days to like rehearse it, shoot it, edit it, and release it after that. So it is a crazy short turnaround.
Yeah. And so I want to know, like we do with all of our first time guests, Xero, like you are a horror fixture here. You know a lot. You've hosted rounds of trivia before. So before we get too much into Cryptz itself, like give us a little bit of your origin story with horror. And then like, I also kind of want to know if you found some of this Full Moon stuff and Big City Pictures on the shelf also.
Yes, I'm really glad that you asked this question. I love telling this story. But compared to a lot of my friends and colleagues in the horror space, I kind of got into horror a little bit later than everyone else did. You know, a lot of my friends are like 6 years old. My mom took me to see Nightmare on Elm Street, which was wildly inappropriate. But for me, I found horror is it's a fucked up story. Here it goes. So I'm in middle school, right? And for some reason, which now as an adult, I look back and I plant this on 9/11, but I just had this random fear of like everything. I have real issues with fear, and it was getting very irrational at some point.
Oh, you're in good company, I think. 'Cause
Okay,
we are
good. We're all
two,
paranoid here.
neurotic,
yeah.
scaredy
Oh
cat.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm the world's most anxious boy.
Why do we all find ourselves here? Well, actually,
Right.
I know why. I know exactly why.
I suspect it's because we're smart and conscious, but you know, that's a whole other podcast we'll do. But yeah.
Let's go with that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm in middle school and I have this issue with fear, and it's totally irrational. It got to the point where it was kind of hindering my quality of life. And at about 13, 14 years old, you know, I thought to myself, I got to do something about this eventually. It was the point where I developed a random fear of automatic flushing toilets, like the ones in public. I don't know what the fuck I thought was going to happen. Like I was going to get sucked up, or like, I really don't know to this day, but it got to the point where I just would not use public toilets. If they flushed automatically, I just wouldn't do it. So I
think
said
you
to
were
myself,
worried that a little ghoulie was going to pop out.
maybe.
I'm still worried about that. Yeah.
So I said to myself, like, all right, it's time to do something about this. You can't keep living your life like this. When somebody calls the landline, you can't go run and hide. You know, you're going to be a grown up someday. Grown ups don't live like this. So, you know, using middle school logic, which I now learn is something called exposure therapy, I said, how do I make myself less scared of everything? And, you know, with middle school logic, that means going on the internet. And I'm a 90s kid. So at this time, it was like late 2000s, and the internet was a lot less regulated than it is now.
Sure.
So I had lots of access from, you know, good old Reddit and so on and so forth of the craziest, creepiest, scariest shit that I could find. And I just binged all of it. And I really started with kind of the video nasty era and also the darker parts of the internet, where I stumbled upon films like Cannibal Holocaust and Faces of Death, and, you know, my beloved rotten.com to try to desensitize
Of
myself. Yeah, I know it's real fucked up, but you know what I'm saying.
Oh, we did it. We all did it. Yeah.
we all made it. And in that, I found that I like this. You know, I don't know if it helped me become less of a scaredy cat, but I did find something that I was really passionate about, which is fucked up storytelling. And a lot of that beginning journey for me was the B's and the C's of horror. And this one I actually came back to later. I first watched Cryptz during the pandemic while doing some research on Black horror and Black experiences in horror. But way back in the day when I was a teenager, it was Killjoy for me. Killjoy is like one of the first crazy out of this world clown movies that I'd seen, even before I had even taken the dive down into it and so on and so forth. But Killjoy still holds a very soft place in my heart. And through that, I've also developed a soft spot for independent horror, and the B's and the C's. And, you know, right before we pressed the record button, one of y'all said something about meeting the movie where it's at. And that's what I love. And I haven't left those dark corners of the internet since.
Hell yes. I think every horror fan has had that, like, Faces of Death phase, which is like, it's an unpleasant but like important part of kind of your cinematic journey. You know, you're pushing your limits a little bit and kind of seeing where, you know, seeing what the outer edges of like the film world are, you know.
How else are you going to know what your boundaries are?
Exactly. And like you said, it's exposure therapy. I suspect a lot of people who are involved in horror or like really love horror deeply are probably very anxious people at heart, because there is something cathartic about getting these images on screen. They're out of your head and they're on screen where they can't hurt you. So now, like, really the scariest thing you have to worry about happening on a toilet is just like, drinking something from a bottle and turning into street trash, like that might happen. But, otherwise it's like, it does help you kind of process all these things. And like, you can look at it from the outside and sort of point and laugh in a certain degree. And like, oh yeah, look at how silly this would look if something like this were to happen. So it's healthy. It's very healthy, I think.
Yeah, it's a healthy. I mean, I think horror creators, it's a healthy way for us to exercise those demons. Like and I think we've said this before on mic too. Like every single horror industry person that I know is like a total sweetheart, and it's like just the nicest people. And then they'll make a movie with the most heinous shit you've ever seen.
Oh yeah,
It's like, because it's just that's how we deal with trauma and exposure therapy and stuff like that, and just like kind of in a healthy way. You make some art where something catastrophic happens, but there's no real life consequences to it. I think it's totally fine for us to process things that way.
Absolutely.
It's really interesting. I never made the connection to like why people get into the genre when they do. Like I was one of those people, Xero, like you were saying, like it wasn't my mom taking me to it, but when I was like seven, maybe 7 or 8, my mom let my cousin take me, who had just turned 16, to the theater. I'm going to date myself here, to see Nightmare on Elm Street 4.
Okay.
And I was I was in like 2nd grade, and I was so excited because I was already obsessed with Freddy at that point. And it was like I got to go to this forbidden thing that I wasn't supposed to see. And with Faces of Death, yeah, I mean, I had a VHS copy of Faces of Death. I had, by the time I was maybe 13, I had a few years of being the bad influence kid when it came to having these movies in my house.
Yeah.
And so that became the other thing. Like, oh, I got Faces of Death in my house. Oh, yeah, don't tell anyone that it's here. Come on, we'll watch it later, but don't tell anyone that you saw it here. That kind of stuff. I mean, that's a rite of passage, man. And it is. We've said with people like Ted Gagin, who is someone who's obviously spent the better part of over a decade writing and making horror stories. He told a story about how he was petrified of horror and refused to watch it until a certain point. So we have like almost complete opposite origin stories, and yet we're all here.
Yeah,
we are all here.
We
That's
are all
a good
here.
example of the point earlier, because Ted is like the sweetest guy ever.
Absolutely.
And then you watch his movies, I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you, Ted? How can you be this this cute teddy bear of a family man and then make some fucked up art like that? But it does check out.
I know. We were talking about like the smuttiest trash, like on our episode with it. We were talking about.
I'm sure you were.
What was it? Slave Girls from Beyond Infinity or something like that. And he's just got like a baby bouncing on his lap and just being like a cute, cuddly dad. And we're just like, yeah, I love it. It's the dichotomy of man.
Yeah, it is. And before we get any further in this, Steve, I don't believe you've done this yet, but could you fire off a couple stats about the movie Cryptz that we're covering
today? I most
today?
certainly can. Cryptz, that's with a Z at the end of it, everybody. It's released May 5th, 2002. It's directed by Danny Draven, written by Scott Phillips, and it stars Choice Skinner, Rick Irvin, Dennis Waller, London De Leon, Ty Badger, and China as Truck. I really need to include that credit because I just loved that individual shot. That's such an inscrutable thing if you haven't watched the movie. China as Truck. I don't know if anybody else assumed automatically this was the late female wrestler, the tragic WWE figure. It is not that China.
I mean, talk about dating something 2002.
Yeah, very much so. That would lock it right in time. But that would have been around her heyday, right? Like that was around when she would have been showing up in movies.
Oh yeah,
like
that's Attitude Era WWE
for sure.
Yeah, DX and New Age Outlaws and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
And in fact, the China in this movie is a stuntman named Andre McCoy. We'll go into him a little bit more later. But I want to give a little bit of backstory once again on Alchemy Entertainment, which of course alchemized into Big City Pictures. Now, Alchemy Entertainment, it started in 1999 with Ragdoll. That was the very first movie under their label. Now, the whole Alchemy Entertainment label was created specifically as a way of letting Black creators like put something out there for Black audiences. That was kind of the mission statement. And for 2 movies, they kind of were doing that, at least in terms of like the creators behind the scene. We had Ragdoll was directed by Ted Nicolau, who is a white man, of course. But Killjoy is one of the only Full Moon movies that is written, directed, starring an entirely Black cast and an entirely Black crew. And that really does not happen very often. So Alchemy was it was Charles Band founded this, and he put Total Recall actor Mel Johnson Jr. in charge of the label. So Benny the cab driver from Total Recall was in charge of producing these movies. So this is the last film that was released under this very short label. There really were not many movies under this. We had Ragdoll, Killjoy, The Abominable Dr. Bone, or The Horrible Dr. Bones, Killjoy 2, and Cryptz would be in the last one. Already we covered this on our Killjoy episodes, but they drifted away from this idea of like black horror almost immediately with that series. They recast Killjoy with a white actor, and it eventually just became more about a killer clown than it was like involving any kind of like black audiences or anything like that. And the same is true with this movie as well. This is written and directed by two white guys. And it's the team behind the movie Horror Vision, which we watched.
I was going to say, we got a Horror Vision reteam here again.
Yeah. Another movie that I thought was like wittier and more fun than it needed to be, and it was like struggling against the conceits of its budget. I think this movie kind of falls into that same
I think Danny
category.
Draven is somebody who's shown that he has an ability to create serviceable projects, if nothing else, with these limitations, and you'll hear him on our show in the near future.
Hell yeah. I'm excited to have him on, and I want to hear some stories about some of these behind the scenes movies, because for his part, he calls this the best film shoot he's ever worked on, despite being a 5-day shoot. That
crazy.
He was aware that this was derivative. He was aware that this is hitting a lot of the same beats as like From Dusk Till Dawn and Blade and a lot of movies like that were popular in the late 90s. He was aware of it. He knew that they were working with a very, very limited budget, but he had a great time. He said the cast had a great time. The cast improvised heavily, which I think adds a lot of humor and a lot of energy to the film. Scott Phillips says only about half of what he wrote is like on the screen, and then so much of the other interchanges are improvised and a lot of fun. So that's kind of where we're coming from to start with. This is the last film put out under that sub-label, and it's a bummer that they never really went back and tried this again, because Killjoy was a really decent sized hit for them when that first came out. Felt like that was going to be a trend going forward, and they kind of abandoned it and sort of embraced I would say there's a long stretch in the mid 2000s where they're mostly embracing like the frat boy Spencer's Gifts crowd more than any one specific audience. They weren't really targeting any of their material anywhere other than there.
Right. And with Alchemy, it was kind of the mission statement was to, for a couple of these movies, to not only, and I hate to use the term, but it's the term that they were using at the time, to make an urban horror movie. And not only that, though, was have a predominantly a cast of color, but also have like the music of the cast, have them be this like either rap groups or R&B groups. And then Alchemy's goal was to release the soundtrack CDs at the same time. So for Ragdoll, I think they did that with the KT Bounce group.
Yeah,
I think that was maybe the only, and then that was the only CD I think of all of them that ever got released, which is unfortunate because this one relies a lot less heavily on the music aspect. It's established that they're rappers, but like with Ragdoll, there are multiple musical numbers in that. Here, you don't really get that. It's just like these are rappers who maybe they collaborate, maybe they rap individually. I don't really think they didn't talk much about the music until a song plays at the end, and I was like, you know what? This song is kind of good.
Yeah, they weren't bad. I mean, I think the kind of whole arc of the characters is that they have these aspirations to be this rap group, but they're not actually like trying very hard to get it off the ground at this point, and they kind of need to, their arc, at least the arc of Times Square, really needs to be learning to grow up a little bit.
Right. And if you popped this movie on and you weren't sure like what kind of movie this was going to be, if this was a blind watch, they established that it's a horror movie very early on because they utter the two of the most horrifying words to any New Yorker, which are Times Square.
I know that's right. And you know what else? I'm pretty sure the dude is from California.
Oh, yeah.
So, brother, you better pick a coast and stick with it and it's not the East Coast. I beg to differ.
I mean, as a non-New Yorker, I only know Times Square as the coolest place that everybody wants to go. Yes, yeah, I can understand this logic. Absolutely.
Oh, I don't think Jared gives a fuck about you if he's letting you walk around with that type of information. Man.
Look. All I know is the M&M
little did
store.
anybody know when they when this automatically downloaded in their feed that they were listening to our last episode. But see ya.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyone who wants to recuperate, meet me at the M&M store, and we'll talk about it. Yeah, but I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna say that this establishes that it's a horror movie immediately because the title of the movie has fangs. It bites the ground, and it's like, this is a great choice for an opening title font. I'm like, all right, already I'm in. It looks like stock images from like the very first image of like Final Cut Pro. It's so heavily pixelated, and it's just kind of like rotating into the background. But I was all about it. Like, I loved that.
I decided
I
to
might
find
get that
it charming.
tattooed on me.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, dude, get it.
It would look better than Times Square's tattoo.
Definitely.
That's all I would say. As a person, this is, I don't know if I've talked about this, I feel like, in maybe as a guest on a podcast before, but you know, as someone who's heavily tattooed, nothing makes me laugh more than shitty movie tattoos. They just don't really know how to do it. Like, anybody who has a lot of actual tattoos is usually typecast to be like a gang member or someone in the background. And then when they put the fake tattoos on the actual like characters, it's always hilarious in procedurals, like in like in a Law and Order or CSI type show, where they're like, oh, and he had this like memorable tattoo, and it's the shittiest thing you've ever seen. And it's like, that's an identifiable thing. Like, it's so funny to me. And they'll be like, oh, it's this tatted up guy, and he's got like 6 tattoos that are all like really far apart from one another. And I'm like, most of my body is covered in tattoos.
It'll just be like Kieran Culkin's little sticker tattoo from the Golden Globes. That's locking us in time right there. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, yeah. So Xero, you said you've seen this one once before. You watched it in the pandemic. What was your take on it the first time you watched it?
I knew it wasn't going to be the greatest thing that I've ever put into my eyeballs when I got there. But you know, like we all did, I had a shit ton of time during the pandemic, and it was also a little bit of a spicy time. George Floyd was just murdered. Actually every industry was starting to have really important conversations about representation and inclusion. And I think the personally speaking, the best of those conversations for me as a consumer come from media literacy, because there's a lot to digest there. And as a big old nerd, I think that we could really learn a lot from cinema, and depending on when and where that movie or production took place, we got a lot to learn from it. So, and a lot of it, people either willingly ignore, or it's easy to just go straight over their heads. Sure. And now that the door is open for learning, you know, when people are actually looking to Google these things and find out a little bit more, makes these conversations better. And now everyone doesn't think that I'm just a fucking weirdo because I'm telling you that this movie is about something, and you're like, nah, girl, it's just about killer clowns. That's it. You know what I mean? So I was doing a specific run during the pandemic. It was February, so we were doing all Black horror stuff, and I wanted to get in a little bit to what we call the Z horror subgenre.
By which he means films that pluralize themselves with a Z.
Yes, you know, yes, of course.
Yeah, obviously.
It expands a little bit more, but I was really happy to see that the documentary on Shudder Horror Noir that was executive produced by Phil Nobile, who I saw was also on your show not too long ago.
Absolutely. Great documentary.
They did touch on it a little bit. If you go back, it's maybe like 3.5 sentences. There's not a lot of meat there, but it's definitely worth mentioning because there is substance there. So I said, okay, I don't know much about these films. I should probably get them under my belt, because the only one that I know of personally is because I stumbled upon Killjoy on the internet, you know, over a decade ago.
Yeah.
So the Z, right? The Z, you put the Z on the end, and that tells your viewers that it's Black, essentially. So Cryptz,
right,
vamps, wolves, whatever. There's a Z on it, you know that it's going to have some sort of integration to Black or hip hop street culture.
Yeah.
And it's going to be scary because the title probably has fangs.
Yeah.
Like this one does. And I gotta say, it's not my favorite of this subgenre. It also bleeds out a little bit farther with something that I like to call hood horror.
Yeah.
Which, you know, might not have a Z, but something like Holla or like Eric Lassane and Crazy as Hell, which I fucking love that movie.
Okay.
But it tells stories from a different perspective, and I really view these as a second coming of like blaxploitation film, in the sense that what you guys were talking about earlier with the label, the point of the subgenre is to have blackface front-facing stories. Not all the time are they written and directed by Black people, the same as it was back in the blaxploitation era. It was the same shit, but still there are very wacky and specific subgenre of horror movies that force you to meet them at their own level. But once you get down there, then you can have a good time. So Cryptz was, I have to admit, not my favorite, but it does have some really fun moments, laughable moments, and something that I don't think that we should let this one die. I really don't think we should. But yeah, I guess you could say I'm a fan. I'm not going to go tell my granny to watch it or anything like that. But, you know, a couple beers with my homies on the couch and we can have a good laugh and maybe a half a jump scare, if you know, maybe a quarter.
Yeah, I thought there was actually some pretty effective gore a couple of times in this. Like the tattoo peeling was pretty vivid.
That's the big difference for me. That's the big difference for me between this and something like in Killjoy, because in Killjoy, it's like there's a couple of creepy ways where Angel Vargas is like revealed as Killjoy in that movie. But then when it comes to the actual kills, they're relatively bloodless, and then the blood that you do see is like CGI bullets and CGI blood spray, and it's really ineffective in that way to me. When I was watching this one, I mean, it started, and I was like, all right, here we go. Like, this is, this is the turn of the century, if anything ever was, and this is as standard def as you could possibly get.
Yeah,
shot on tape, you know, like pre-digital. Super low
like
budget,
15p or something. Yeah, it's hard to look at. It is hard to look at.
Right. Well, at least it starts that way. And I was like, all right, well, buckle in. Like this might be a tough sit. And then the first gore effect happened, and I went, oh no, that's a decent practical gore effect that I wasn't really expecting. And then from that point on, I feel like because I just think there were things, especially when compared to the slog that is Killjoy 2.
Yeah.
Like Killjoy 1 had some things going for it. And when we talked about that one with Stevie Webb, we talked about, like you were mentioning, Xero, about having these, Black led stories by Black filmmakers for Black audience. And you get a lot of that in Killjoy. And then in Killjoy 2 really moves away from that. And it gets into, I don't really even know what it's trying to do, but Choice Skinner.
Deliverance, kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
My God.
It's so strange. But Choice Skinner, who plays Times Square in this movie, is also in Killjoy 2. Yeah. And he has nothing to do in that movie. But here I feel like he has a lot more to do. And I think he actually leans into the camp a little bit.
Yeah.
And he's able to do that in a scene where, Steve, I know sometimes you clip things for the end of the show. Please clip him screaming while he's fighting off a vampire with a bone, because it's legitimately hilarious and it's all purposeful.
Oh yeah.
Like it's not just, he's he might have been improvising that, but I have no doubt in my mind that if his reaction was improvised, you have to keep that in, because everyone on the crew is probably laughing hysterically.
Right.
And it just totally makes sense. And he's given so much more. And I just feel like the camaraderie between Times Square, Fuzzy Down, and Licorice. What three great like names to say in succession. Some of the other characters, the names are forgettable. I think that was one of the things that worked about Ragdoll too, was that Kwame, the leader of KT Bounce, and had the camaraderie and the way they kind of ribbed on one another was enjoyable and made them feel sort of real in a sense. And I think like for this ultra low budget, ultra quick movie, they actually sort of establish what feels like an organic relationship with these three guys. Like, you know, I'm not saying that any of them are going to be up for any major awards, but
no, but I
think
liked
they're
all three
pretty
of them.
believable.
Yeah, I liked all of them. I thought they were funny, and I'm glad that they were allowed to improvise so much, because there are moments that you're falling into the trap of like, this is a white man writing dialogue that is not based on any lived experience, but is based on watching movies. And so it gets kind of diluted and comes off a little cringy at times. So I'm glad they let these guys like speak for themselves and kind of come up with some of their own dialogue and kind of build the relationship from there. I think that helped a lot. I also really liked London De Leon, who was playing kind of the temptress character. I thought she was really fun. I thought she had a good like presence in the movie later on when she's like being asked to do like a creepy, like gravelly vampire voice. I mean, it's pretty transformative. You can still tell it's her, but like, yeah, she's doing a voice. She's making choices. She's giving a performance here. I thought she was quite good. You know, and there's a lot of fun stuff like that. Now, I will say this. I'm not a club guy. I'm not a strip club guy. I'm not a club guy. I'm just, I don't really stay away from that scene.
And neither was the set designer of this
That's
movie.
what I was going to say.
Yeah, clearly.
Is there any universe where this club, which is like in somebody's unfinished rec room in like New Jersey, like what is the enticement here? I mean, you look like they might as well name the place Staph Infection. Like it just looks so grody. It looks so gross. It's so poorly lit. It's like there's not even like a Spencer's Gifts like disco ball hanging from anything to add any flavor. Like there's just old sheets. Like I thought I saw a Ninja Turtles pattern on one of them. You know, it's just like it's the least amount of effort that's ever gone into creating a club environment in a movie.
Yeah, that's not checking out, because the club looks like no strip club that I would ever step foot in, but somehow they have very beautiful wait staff and dancers wanting to dance at this club. Yeah, I don't know about all that, but I want to go back 1 second to back to the conversation about dialogue.
Yeah,
I am pretty glad that the writers of the story were not including their own dialogue, because I think that would have been way worse than saying, fuck it, let's find out what happens when we let these guys improvise. And another reason why I think this entire subgenre and also this one specifically, why we should not let these movies die, is because they really are a product of the times. And you know, you can kind of tell that this sort of banter between friends, especially on big screens or on small screens on television, was very 2002. Because when I hear the banter between the friends, I think like Chris Tucker Friday. You know, I think like Wayne's Bros, and that was what was really in at the time. And I mean, they got it's not as much as what they say, it's how they say it. You know, and it comes across very clearly, and it's familiar for people. And that doesn't even have to be familiar for just Black folks, because if you were watching Chris Tucker at the time, which I think
Licorice has seen a Chris Tucker movie.
No,
yes, he has
probably
seen
all
one or
of them.
two. They all three guys kind of have the energy of like up and coming like small town stand-ups, you know, who are really kind of season the moment to kind of show themselves as like the energetic, funny character here. And I think they're bringing it. I think they're having a lot of fun. Like I genuinely got a little sad when Fuzzy Down got turned into a vampire. That was a sentence I wrote in my notes, and I'm like, wow, this would not make sense to anybody outside of the context of this show. But I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I liked his energy. I liked his vibe. I liked that he seemed to have like a writer's room, you know, because his dialogue is always like just too clever by half. You know, he always feels like it's been like workshopped a couple times, like before it comes out of his mouth. I think he calls something oh God, what does he call it? Interior desecrator. He said, "Oh, who's your interior desecrator?" When he's looking around the canvas. I'm like, that's that's such a funny line to be throwing out, but it feels so workshopped. It's like it feels like there's a writer's room working behind that one.
I don't
Right.
remember which one of the three said it, but there was one line that did have me crack up when I think it was Times Square, and he said something about Wu-Tang. He was like, my mom thought Wu-Tang was something that astronauts drink or something.
Yeah.
Like, that was kind of funny. Okay, all right. I'm gonna give y'all that.
Right.
That
Well,
was
and
fun gore moments. I'm with it.
just
But
like
it does,
that,
like you mentioned, the Wayans
Yeah.
brothers. Like it does feel
Mhm.
like a tossed off joke, like that they didn't use on the Wayans brothers
absolutely
sitcom or something.
It,
It's
it
like-
was a joke. It was a joke that was used probably many, many times during a 5-year period from 1998 to 2003. Just like so many people decided to channel the character of Smokey from Friday.
yeah.
Like that's what they did. Like you saw that archetype pop up everywhere after that for a little while. And
Yeah.
it's like, and that's totally fine because it wasn't just here's Full Moon trying to cash in and exploit a trend. Everyone was.
Yeah.
Everyone was. This is just how, you would see that sort of character of like side character of color in so many movies be like basing their performance off of Chris Tucker's energy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's definitely a world where you can look at this and feel very offended as a Black person, but also if you're a Black person who lives in this genre, then unfortunately you've become extremely desensitized to this shit. But this is one of the rare examples where, yeah, it's definitely exploitation media, but in this case, everyone is exploiting the stereotype.
Absolutely.
So I don't really feel too bad about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's not like a lot of malice behind this. Like it's clearly not any of that. It's definitely just one of those production things. Like if they'd had a month instead of 5 days, maybe they would have brought a person of color into the writer room to help kind of like punch things up a little bit, make things a little more authentic. Maybe they could have lit the movie period at all. They could have lit it. That would have been nice. I was gonna say better, but like they could have lit it. Like that would have been nice. Yeah, that's a struggle that this movie has, is that like, yeah, it does just kind of look like absolute ass. And
Every once in a while, when we're dealing with these like micro budget and low budget movies, every once in a while we look at sort of a concept and we look at the bones and the structure and the outline of something, and we have the conversation about like, well, this one kind of, some of them just don't work. Some of them are just like, not only was this hampered by budget and time, it was a bad idea. It's poorly executed in all of these ways.
No one's excited about it. Yeah.
Right. But in something like this, like that's how I felt about Killjoy 2. This one, though, I think every so often we come across one of these movies where it kind of, the question then pops into my head of like, given if this had gotten the treatment of even a B movie, like not an A picture, but even like a B movie, maybe with a budget of more than $30,000, which they were working with at the time, which obviously digitally you can shoot movies much cheaper now, but moving to even to shoot on video for everything they were doing, $30,000, incredibly cheap. If they had more money and more time, like you said, 2 months to make this movie and a $2 million budget, a $3 million budget as a 30,000. Like, I feel like the bones are there where they could have made the horrible bones, if you will.
The horrible bones.
They could have made something, I thought, really good that could have held up as like a cult movie that people would revisit often. Like, I think it wouldn't be original in the sense of like, okay, seedy strip club, vampires, like, okay, yes, it had been done multiple times by 2001 when Danny Draven was pitching this idea, but like they could have made something that went even beyond just a serviceable movie into something like, oh, well, what about that one? Oh, that's like kind of an obscure one, but you know what, like it's pretty cool, but it never got a theatrical release, but it's actually pretty good. And we could have been having that conversation of it being like a kind of low-key classic in the genre. Instead, we end up, unfortunately, like the circumstances happened, and this is the movie we were given, and it is totally serviceable, which I think is a minor miracle given all of its limitations.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. No, you can feel, and we mentioned this when with Horror Vision as well, like because that's another movie that struggles a lot with its limitations, but you could tell that Danny Draven was excited about the film, that he was just kind of like it felt like he was a guy who was jazzed that he gets to be making a film, and he's not going to be, picky about what film he's making. He's just jazzed that he's getting to make something for any amount of money in any amount of time. And that kind of energy is infectious, and it carries over into the movie, and it carries across through the performances and everything else. And I think that's what we're working with Cryptz as well. Even I was drifting in and out of the plot a little bit when we got into the more heavy vampire stuff. There's like a voodoo priestess woman who like can't speak and is like kind of pulling all the strings behind the scenes. It definitely kind of drags on a little bit. I'm thinking like maybe a full quarter of the film's runtime is just Licorice slamming that one guy's head against the wall.
Yeah. Oh my God. Why did that never end?
They padded it out so long. He's just bashing like Joel Grey or like into the wall over and over again, or like the Robert Blake character from Lost Highway, whatever he's trying to be. Like it's like this weird kind of zombie vampire guy. But we do arrive at a place of Times Square. Our protagonist has kind of learned something about himself. He has learned that he needs to make some more active choices, that he needs to take a little control of his destiny and not be distracted by the world's grossest clubs and kind of, figure his shit out, So that's a character arc that a lot of movies wouldn't have bothered with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, usually there with something like this, there could be no, character development at all, and it would still be fine. It would still be fine. I'm going to say something a little. I don't even know if this is controversial.
Okay,
but I'm going to say, because this general theme, stripper, vampire guy gets enticed by the whatever blah 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 this thing. Okay, so we've seen the Grace Jones vamp. Yeah, that one was fucking awesome. Still not a great movie, but a great movie. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
This one definitely could have used more than 5 days, but I think it's still worth holding on to. And what I will say is Cryptz walked so vamps could walk just a little bit faster. I'm not going to say run, but just walk just a little bit faster. And I believe that, who was it? I think it was Fuzzy Down. Fuzzy Down made the switch, which, am I going to call him a traitor? I don't think so, because I feel like it's all love in this subgenre that is extremely, extremely small. But Fuzzy Down did make the transition from walking in Cryptz to walking slightly faster in Vamps, also known as Sister Vampires. But I think Vamps is better because, the Z, everything with the Z.
Everything with the Z. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and it's unusual too. You mentioned that this is kind of an archetype of the temptress monster character, right?
Yes.
And it gets to be a woman of color here, which is also really cool, which doesn't happen very often. This is a time-worn trope, and she does also get to play a little bit of the tragedy of it, that she is still a human being under it who is being manipulated and controlled, and being used to kind of lure men in, so that is something that's cool. That's something it's always worth noting, even if it's something that's recycling a trope. You can put a new spin on the trope. You can open it up to new people and different genres and things like that, and you can find ways to make it noteworthy and make it fun and make it different.
I agree. Totally.
Yeah, there's some Gremlins like rules, like just whatever you do, don't get a private dance.
Yeah, don't do that. Oh my God, we haven't even talked about Truck. I put a pin in Andre McCoy. I got to pull that pin out.
Yeah, no, we have to talk about Truck because his introduction, the introduction of this character was so funny to me. Go ahead, Steve. You seem very passionate to get this out.
How do we describe Truck? It seems like he's just this kind of martial arts hood guru who most people avoid because he's just constantly shirtless and flexing and doing kicks and shit. And but he seems to know everything. He can solve everything, and everybody's still afraid to talk to him at all.
Yeah, there's a great line where Times Square, I think, says it to him, where he's like, this spooky shit is why no one wants to hang out with you.
Yeah. Exactly. Like that's funny. Like that's a funny line to throw out because if you're going to have this character in this world, people should be commenting that this character is weird.
That's where this movie really won me over, was when it got into sort of the third act, or at least the second half of the movie, where it seemed to be, I don't know if there's, I mean, I know there's obviously a lot of like kind of banal improvising where it's just like, oh, you guys are just hanging out, like say something you'd say while you guys are hanging out. But then in some of the exchanges between Times Square and Truck, and like some of the exchanges between the other characters and some of the strippers and stuff, it really started to read more self-aware. And it started to be a little more tongue-in-cheek. And then, like I said, the scene where Times Square is fighting off the vampires with the bone and screaming, he is channeling like Goofy in The Art of Skiing Disney short. It's that is a very dated reference, and I apologize to anyone under the age of 40 who has no
Let's
idea.
Be real. Anyone under the age of 70.
But yeah, if you've never heard the Goofy screaming in The Art of Skiing Disney short, do yourself a favor and just go to YouTube and watch a clip of that, and then watch Cryptz and the scene when he's yelling. Man, I was howling watching this, because it was an acting choice, and it went so far in the face of what we often see in a lot of these movies, which are non-acting choices. Like everything's really stiff, everything's really wooden. Here, like you said, like everyone seems to be having a pretty good time, and when they had the opportunity to go kind of full camp and be tongue-in-cheek, they all seemed to embrace it, and they point out how ridiculous some of it is. And I admired that about the movie.
Yeah, for sure. Like there's little moments like that. Like Truck is absolutely meant to be Blade, right? Like he's playing in that kind of area of like this martial arts guy who comes in and kills vampires. But the cool thing is that Andre McCoy is a really accomplished and really talented stunt performer. He was in all the Matrix movies. He's in like a shitload of movies going all the way back. And so he's like the real deal as a martial artist, and he's bringing that energy. He's obviously doing his own fight choreography, and like some of the fight scenes that he's in are pretty good. I don't know, like he's bringing it. And I thought his delivery was funny, and how like deadpan he was, and how kind of like take no bullshit his attitude was like, and it's just kind of a funny character. Like he kind of drops out of the movie after a bit.
Yeah, definitely. But he comes back with the full circle of the spooky comment. After he's like, he basically saves the day, and he's like, well, that's what all this spooky was about, or something like that. I don't know, but it was camp. I loved every second of it. He's like a love child of like Blade and Hanzo from Kill Bill or something. I want to see this guy again. I really do, in a similar role like this too. I think
who was the guy, Steve? Who was the guy in Horror Vision? There was a guy in Horror Vision 2 who kind of was a similar character. It was James Black, and he played he played a character named Bradbury, and he was essentially like Neo from the Matrix, but he also was super jacked and wearing just a vest.
Yeah. Like that little bit of like, and that had the same kind of vibe of like, this is a little self-aware. They kind of know how silly this character is, and like how silly what he's doing is, but they're leading into it, you know. So
hey, man, I really believe that if these movies weren't as self-aware as they were, then we would have no reason to be talking about them.
Oh, absolutely.
Today. Or at least a significant less reason to talk about them. But they clearly knew what they were doing. And however many years later, oh my God, this is 2002. What the fuck?
Right.
We're still, we can still pick up on those cues. And I think that that's awesome. And that's, even though this is, it's definitely a C movie, but that's good filmmaking in my eyes.
I mean, we talk about this a lot. Like the people who make these movies are not dummies. They don't think they're making high art. They know that they're kind of trying to make the best of what they can with the very strict limitations that they have. And they've got kind of like a workman-like approach to it, where they're just like, I'm going to get in, punch the clock. I'm going to get this shit done, and then I'm going to move on. You know, but they're aware and they're smart and they know what kind of movies that they're making. And I think with a movie like this, it really helps that they have that little bit of a wink. You know, even when some of the horror scenes, they do seem to be taking pretty seriously. Like they lean into the blood of it. Like there's a real good like throat rip.
Yeah, the throat rip out. Like, those were good.
There's a couple of good things, you know, and like I said, some of the deaths like do have impact and do kind of resonate, you know. So
I think this movie's missing the villain performance of William Stanford Davis from Ragdoll.
Oh, right.
Mr. Johnson from Abbott Elementary.
Yeah, I forgot he did that.
He's the bad guy. He's what was his name again? He had a good character name. Big,
I don't remember.
Big something. Big. It'll come to me. But he's really fun in that movie, and we don't really have that sort of dialed in villain performance. But I will say, of all of the big city full moon stuff, that was sub-label stuff that we've seen so far, this one I think has the best gore effects and best practical gore effects that we've seen, because like I mentioned earlier, they do break for subbing in some of the CGI blood and bullet spray, and nothing will take you out of a movie faster. And in Killjoy there was some kind of creepy moments, but then you had the scene with the machine gun CGI bullet spray. I don't know how that doesn't just immediately take you completely out of the experience. Big Pear was his name.
Big Pear. Yeah, that's it.
That's what it just came. It just
P-E-R-E, right? Yeah, it's P-E-R-E. Yeah,
and then there was also don't forget Little Mikey.
Oh,
Little Mikey.
Yeah,
never forget Little Mikey.
So we covered Ragdoll on the Movie Dumpster podcast. So we had a rule that when we talk about one of the movies on another show, we won't cover it on our own show. For anybody who hasn't listened to that yet, and you're hearing us talk about Ragdoll, and you're like, when did they cover that? Go to Movie Dumpster's feed, and I think it was from February of 2024. We were on that, so you can find that episode on there. And we all liked Ragdoll a pretty good deal and had a lot of nice things to say about it.
Absolutely.
And I'm actually legitimately shocked that I have as much positive to say about this one as I do. I genuinely really didn't expect it. I was kind of like, oh man. And even getting started, I was kind of, this is going to be a slog. All right, it's only 77 minutes. Like it's fine. But I found myself really getting into it. And I think, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but it's like this movie being made under such tight conditions, I think showed that, and this is probably why, like, moving from this movie, the next thing that Danny Draven did was collaborate in some way with Stuart Gordon to make Deathbed.
Oh yeah,
so
right.
I think Stuart Gordon maybe saw something in him, like this is a young guy who can make these movies quickly and cheaply and elevate them a little bit. Like he has the skill to do that, and so I'm really looking forward to when we have him on soon to talk about Deathbed and his experience with Stuart Gordon. And I want to know how that was informed by the stuff that came before it, because with Horror Vision and this movie, he was in his really early 20s. And he made Horror Vision and this one back to back, and he made two pretty fun C movies. And I just really got on board for this, and I was just thinking to myself while I was taking notes, oh, I love the angle they're doing here so much more than in Killjoy 2.
Yeah,
or I love Joyce Skinner's performance here so much more than in Killjoy 2. It's just everything's compared.
And fuck Killjoy 2.
Truly, like there are not many movies that we just like full on like just give the full thumbs down to, but Killjoy 2 deserves it just in terms of laziness of execution and just kind of abandoning what made the first Killjoy cool and just making it bland.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Did y'all ever watch that third one?
The third one is fun for what it is. The third one is shifting gears completely, and now it is just leaning into, this is a killer clown, and he's got a wacky clown universe that he lives in where everything's cartoonish, and he's got all these other clown sidekicks, and they come out. It's a little more generic, but it's brightly colored, and it's fun, it's funny, and it's performance.
Okay.
Like Killjoy 3
I've got that DVD that's got all three of them together.
Yeah.
Like after 2, I was so heartbroken I couldn't do 3. But if you guys are saying it's all right,
No, it's
Three's
step
better.
up.
Again,
It's a step up.
They
I mean,
Okay.
totally shift away from what made the first one special, but they did find something. They found a thing for Killjoy
yeah,
to do.
it's more
Yeah.
about like the psycho circus now, and it's like Killjoy is just a killer clown. Everything's kind of like sillier and larger than life. You have the Batty Boop character. That's a nice addition, and I think like that crew would continue through the other Killjoy sequels after that also. So I feel like 2 was the misstep, and then they get it. They correct it a bit in 3. And I'll be honest, like I have not actually watched 4 or 5, and there's actually one that just came out. Like there's one literally on the Full Moon streaming app that I think came out like 2 weeks ago.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know if that trend will continue from Killjoy 3, but it definitely was a step up from the second one.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as like if we're getting into our kind of final thoughts on it now,
Yeah.
I had a lot more fun with this one than I was anticipating. I expected to kind of half watch it and like jot some stuff down and make a few notes here and there. And I found myself like just really enjoying the reliance on practical gore, the campiness, the leaning into the kind of almost fourth wall breaking, winking attitude that the performers started to take in the movie. I like this. I may watch this again like sometime in the reasonably near future, like in the next couple of years. Like I might just think, oh, you know, I've got 77 minutes and I have nothing else to do. Like maybe I'll throw Cryptz on again because I remember liking it, and maybe I'll catch something that I missed in the first watch. And I'm surprised that I enjoyed this as much as I did.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. So did y'all watch this on the Full Moon streaming app?
I think it was on Prime for me.
I watched it on Prime because I know
Mhm.
there's an alternate title situation, and I'm just curious because after I was looking at some reviews on Letterboxd and other people had mentioned that it's under a different name somewhere else. I personally think Cryptz is the name that it should go with.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think it's a little bit more unique. What's the other title? It's like obviously like something in the hood, like strippers
Of
in the
course.
hood.
Yeah,
Something
let me see if I can find that because I didn't know there was another title. The only one it came up
here
for
it is.
was
It's
as
called
me.
Naturally, Vampire Strippers in the Hood.
Of course.
Yeah. What else would it be besides Cryptz?
That feels like the log line, you know. That just feels like it's like
no shit.
All right, what's the movie about? Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
They went to the snakes on a plane school of movie naming.
100%. Yeah. It's like, okay, you know, all right, we're just gonna throw all of these together. That feels more like kind of B movie, like magnet poetry, you know. It's just like, yeah.
Okay, I asked that because I think Cryptz is a very fitting title, and also I feel very passionately about the Z era of Black horror, right? And I think that should be held on to. And also Vampire Strippers in the Hood just sounds a little ghetto. We already know it's going to be ghetto because the Z is there. You don't have to tell us that it's going to be ghetto. It's fine.
So what you're telling
for
us, Xero, is that
reasons,
our podcast name should become Puppet Masters Castle
Puppet
Six.
Masters.
Just replace all the S's with Z's. Yeah. Casdle Freaks. Yeah.
Your demographics would change exponentially within 1 month. But what I love about this movie is, and I'm glad that, because for example, I have talked about vamps on a different podcast, and I was trying to find it, couldn't find it until I realized that it was under its alternate name, Sister Vampires. But I like the Z because when you add the Z on there, then it's easier to package into a box, and then you could learn about the history of this time in filmmaking and this little bubble that we have. And then when you go in and you actually watch these movies, they really feel like a time capsule. And that's what I love about this. So, and that's how I found it, right? I'm looking to do some research, and then I see this movie with the Z on the end. I get in there, and what I'm hoping for is what I get, which is a time capsule of Black horror in 2002, from the dialogue, from the, that kind of music video-esque editing, like, it's more famously like in Saw when the throat rip scene and everything's shaking like I'm about to break out into my rap solo or whatever.
Yeah.
I love that. I
Absolutely.
love it. And it gave me everything that I wanted in this. Is it a good movie? No. Did I have a good time? Absolutely. And would I recommend it if you need to learn more about this era of horror and also Black involvement in horror? 1000%. So not a waste of my time at all.
Absolutely. I was
Xero,
kind of in the
can I
same
ask
camp,
you
yeah.
something before Steve give his final thoughts here? You know, there is
Yes.
another movie called Vamps, VAMPZ exclamation point
Oh,
that came
yeah.
out in
Oh,
2019.
hold
Better
on.
or
Let me
worse?
get a Google real quick. What?
Oh, interesting. And oh, I don't know about this one at all. Okay. Yeah, totally different movie,
Oh.
but the exclamation point makes it very different. Yeah.
I
Oh,
heard
that's
there's a
like
sequel in production for this one too, which is Vamps with a Z, but then an interrobang.
Oh, good. Vamps? What? Yeah.
this is starting a new era of of C horror. Not not the Z, but the Z exclamation point. Maybe flip it up and reverse it a little bit.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to do some research. Thank you, Jared.
Yeah, there we go. And made with a budget of $10,000, a whopping
Oh
$10,000
boy,
to make
this
Vamps.
gotta be good.
And 5,000 of that went to the exclamation point. But, yeah, so we'll see what we get with the rest of it. But yeah, I'm kind of on the same page as y'all. Like I had more fun with this than I was expecting to. I think it's just kind of a little smarter and a little more knowing and a little more campy than it needs to be. They really did kind of make the absolute most of what they had at their disposal, and got to give them props for that. So I had a good time with Cryptz, and I had a great time talking about Cryptz with you, Xero.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here.
Me too. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course.
Absolutely. Where can people find all of your stuff?
Y'all can find me on pretty much every corner of the internet: Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Threads, fuck it, whatever. I'm in so many apps these days, but all of my handles are XG Horror. You can find me there and watch my little adventures in spooky NYC. You can also listen to my podcast with my co-host Sheree the Slayer at Blerdy Massacre, wherever you get your podcast fix. And we're currently in our 4th season, which is fucking amazing. And yeah, life is good. Thanks for having me again, guys. I really appreciate it.
Well,
Of
we're very
course.
excited to have you. Thank
No,
you.
yeah, and XG Horror is a great follow on all of those platforms. And if you check out her stuff, you're gonna find something that you love. If you love what we do on the show, then what you can do is stop whatever the fuck you are doing at this exact moment and leave us a 5-star rating and maybe a brief review if you feel so inclined. I have to be a little pushier now. You know, I've been too nice about it, too diplomatic to this point. Now stop what you're doing at this exact moment.
Listen to me
and leave us a review or a rating at least. If you want to leave a review as well, that is amazing. One thing I would try to encourage people to do also is to email us at puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com. You know, let us know, especially if you're someone who's not in the United States. We would love to know like how you found the show, what you're enjoying so far, what you like that we do, what you would like us to do differently, any kind of feedback, stuff like that. And just, you know, how you came across us, because I do see that people are downloading from all over the world. And I want to know how you've been exposed to the show. If you want to keep up with what we're doing, the best way to do it is Instagram. You can follow the show at puppetmasters_castlefreaks. You can follow me at _Giallo_Jared or Steve at Minotaur Matador. We are on Threads and Blue Sky as well. So you will see the same updates for new and upcoming episodes there. And there are audio versions of the show available on our YouTube channel, Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks on YouTube as well. Hopefully we'll beef that up a little bit in the future, but it's tough. It's a lot of work, and we're not the only show that Steve has to do all this work for. Steve, what else have you got going on?
Well, I have another show called Cinema Arcade. That's cinema and arcade mashed together into a big old portmanteau, because that is what we are doing on that show. We are watching movies and then playing the video games based on those movies to see how they compare, contrast, detract, enhance each other. We are, as of this recording, in the midst of doing our original Star Wars trilogy miniseries, which has been so much fun. And I have no idea what's coming up. I'm handing it over to my co-hosts in the coming weeks to surprise me with a couple of picks from deep in the spreadsheet. So I'll be surprised. Y'all will be surprised, but we have close to 100 episodes out there already, covering everything from E.T. to Chronicles of Riddick to Rudolph the
Famously
Red-Nosed
amazing
Reindeer.
video game E.T.
Famously amazing video game E.T. Absolutely. We have Jared on talking about Puppet Master the game and Nightmare on Elm Street the game. So lots of great stuff as well. And if you're a horror fan, every October we do all horror movies all month. So we have a bunch of them. We have many more to come. And speaking of more to come, next week we have a whole new episode. We're going to be drifting away from horror once again and going back into the family-friendly environment of Moonbeam Entertainment to talk about a movie called Dragon World. By some estimates, the largest budgeted full moon production period. I believe that's still accurate. I need to double check that, but
Yeah,
I think
I'm excited.
$6 million.
Yeah, I'm excited to do this one because, as in terms of like Moonbeam movies, it's really well regarded. It's a Ted Nicolau joint. He's such a lovely person and a talented director, and I think this is one of those ones where it's like, it didn't feel maybe like a cynical cash grab, entertainment for stupid children.
Yeah.
Like some of those other Moonbeams might have felt. So I'm really looking forward to watching this because I've never seen it. And I think there are a lot of people slightly younger than you and I, Steve, who hold this one in pretty high regard.
Yeah.
So very excited. So yeah, make sure that you join us next week for Dragon World. Thank you again to Xero Gravity for taking the time. Check out Blerdy Massacre and all of her other stuff online. And we will see you guys next time.